very much, and thanks for coming out tonight. I know everybody is busy and stuff going on, and kids moving and going and dinner, and so I appreciate you taking your time to come here this evening. It's really cool for me to be back here in this community. I've been back and forth as I was growing up to visit Bill, and kind of special. Never before, when I was a little guy, did I think that I would be visiting schools, regardless of in Oregon or Maine or wherever it talks about space. It wasn't something that I dreamed of doing, to be quite honest. I was just a normal guy in school, playing sports and trying to do my best in my classes and things, and being a good brother, good son, and all the things I could work on. We didn't have a whole lot of money, and I was trying to figure out where to go to college, and I read about this place, the Naval Academy, where it's free to go. And can you guys hear me? I hear that speaker. I'm wondering, I have this fancy mic, but I don't have it turned on. You need me to turn it on? Everybody's good? You couldn't hear me up back there?
It's a little hard.
All right, let me do this here, and we'll see if that helps at all. So it's on. Sounds like it's working. There we go. All right. So, read about the Naval Academy, free place to go to school, so I applied and found myself there. And I kind of naively didn't know that there's different things you can do in the military. None of my family had been in the military before. And I read about, or while I was there, I learned that you could be in the certain ships or submarines or pilot or SEAL teams. And I met a couple guys who were in the SEAL teams, and they were pretty motivating guys. And so I sort of set my sights on that, and it worked out. I had 10 fantastic years in the SEAL teams. That's a whole other thing I can talk about. You're welcome to ask questions later about that. But during that 10-year period, midway through that or so, is when I met this guy named Bill Shepard, who was in the SEAL teams before and had gone on to become an astronaut. He would happen to be the commander of the first crew on the International Space Station. And in talking with him is what the light bulb kind of dawned for me of, wow, it's just an application process. Anybody, any U.S. citizen can apply to become a NASA astronaut. And if his background was competitive to be selected, I'm kind of similar, maybe I could too, and that's what motivated me. So I was older, probably 25 or 6, when the first idea to become an astronaut popped into something that I thought about. It's a little bit different. Most astronauts, I would say greater than half astronauts were thinking about it when they're these guys here and dreaming of hopefully one day getting to space. So I applied. We have an astronaut selection class about every 4 years or so. It's not a rule. And in the 2000 time frame, I applied for that class and was not selected. And then 4 years later, 2004, applied again, and that's when I got the call if I would still be interested in coming to work for him. Can you imagine that phone call? You know, the person's asking you, are you still interested in becoming an astronaut? It's like, duh. For you mean to ask me that question? So that was in the late spring of 2004. In the summertime of 2004, I moved to Houston. That's where all of the astronaut training takes place, well, the U.S. training. And I say that because it's the International Space Station. There are 5 partner organizations in the International Space Station. NASA, of course, the Russian Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. Europe has, I think, 16 member nations, and so that all those groups combine to run the International Space Station program. Just at an interesting point, the program manager of the space station is a U.S. person, a guy, and at the time, right now, it's always a U.S. person, and it's in Johnson Space Center. Happens to be a guy right now, and each country has representatives that report to him, and collectively they figure out the kind of 2 parts of it. There's the operational side, which is making it run, fixing broken stuff, doing spacewalks and this sort of thing. And then there's the experiment side, all the payloads and science and things that are that are going on board the space station. And those experiments and researchers come from universities, labs around the world, and there's a board or panel that sorts through all these different applications or suggestions on which type of experiment will be run. So it's definitely an international group. I say that, but the Russians sometimes have their own, because they have the ability to get equipment and things to the space station, and they have their own people, and they sometimes have unilateral experiments, but it's all coordinated through the space station program. So, anyways, of these 5 groups, I should say that Canada's contribution is the smallest financially, but it's really huge in terms of function, because they provide the robotic arm. And just if you go to any big city in the world and you see skyscrapers being erected, what's right next to all those skyscrapers is a big crane, right? With the arms sweeping out, and you certainly couldn't build a city without cranes. And you can't build a space station without a robotic arm. We have 2. One was fixed to the shoulder, if you will, of the space shuttle, and there was a smaller arm, and then the large robotic arm is on the space station, and there's this mobile, think of it like a small rail car. The space station is this very large cylindrical tube that you can live in, and then perpendicular to that, you'll see it in the video, is a support structure for the solar arrays and all of the wiring and things that provide the electricity to get into the habitable part. Along that support structure is like this little rail car that can move back and forth, and the robotic arm can fix itself to that mobile base and get all the way to the various tipping points left and right of the space station. And so that robotic arm is a gigantic portion of how we can have a space station built right now. So 2004, I show up. The first 2 years, you're an astronaut candidate, and a lot like being a graduate student, really. We spend our mornings in a classroom learning about the theory of different part of the space station and the space shuttle, and then later on in the day or the next day go into the simulator and apply in practice what the different theoretical parts that we learn. And then the training team, these evil guys and gals that think of the most mischievous way that they can screw up the space station and space shuttle and watch us flounder around and try to fix it. And they do a pretty good job. And consequently, I think we have really, really well-trained crews to respond. In fact, I remember on my shuttle launch, it almost seemed boring, because other than maybe my introductory time in the simulator of a shuttle launch, and the very last one before you launch, they have a normal one. Other than that, I had never had a 9-minute period with no lights and whistles and bells going off, and except for the real one. You just sit there and you're going, when's something to break? But so 2004 to 2006, kind of this basic training period, if you will, and after that, full-fledged member of the astronaut office, ready to be assigned to a mission, kind of just waiting your turn until the email says come down to the boss's office. And that happened for me in about 2007 or so, 2008, and that was to be assigned to the Space Shuttle Endeavour through STS-127, and we flew to the space station in the summer of 2009. 2 weeks to the space station, largely part of the assembly portion of the space station. We took up a Japanese exposed facility, and I'll point it out on the video, and assembled that. Along with that comes a bunch of spacewalks, because the robotic arm can stick and plug the thing in where it goes, but then there's some fine-tuned work that needs to be done that you can't do robotically, and oftentimes where you have to hook some cables up and release some what we call launch locks, because the vibrations of pieces of equipment inside the shuttle cargo bay getting to space
it oftentimes would jar loose some of these sensitive equipment. So there's these bolts and things to hold things down, and a person has to go and undo all of that. And so that's what we would do on those particular spacewalks. I landed from that mission another year or so supporting in various roles there in Houston, and then I was told that, or asked if I'd like to start training for what we call long duration mission to the space station. And at that time, that was right when the space shuttle was winding down and about to be completely flown out as a program. And so my next vehicle to launch to space would be in a Russian Soyuz. The shuttle training is only about a year because it's all right there in Houston. It's all in English. There's no travel involved. The space station training is about 2.5 years because you only spend roughly 40% of your time in Houston, and all the remaining time is elsewhere, mostly in Russia, but a little bit in Japan, a little bit in Germany. And along with that comes Russian language training, which is for me as a math guy and very mechanical, and that stuff comes easy for me. But the language has been a very, very challenging part about the whole launching in the Soyuz. Everything is very checklist driven in the space world, and when you open a book and it's all in some not only just foreign language but crazy letters, then it really gets you going. And so we say that only the first 10 years of studying Russian are hard, and that's pretty true, at least for me anyway. So it was generally about 1 year ago from right now that from this month, what are we, kind of late February right now? I think it was a week ago then, maybe mid to early February. I left Houston, got on a United Airlines flight. It was kind of weird actually. There's no fanfare, there's no nothing. You just drop off at the airport, walk in, and fly away to Moscow. And that was about 6 weeks before launch. The 4 weeks of that period in Star City were a series of final exams, and there's a big process where you practice a few of the final exams, and then there's about 6 different envelopes on a table with this the Russian State Space Commission is there to evaluate our performance in both the space station simulator and the Soyuz, and they have envelopes on the table, and we pick one, and in each envelope is a different series of malfunctions, and so it's a random thing, and that's what you get, and some are harder than others. I don't know which envelope is a good one or a bad one, but then you sit in the simulator. It's a whole entire day of a lot of work, and finally you come through that, and it's a very kind of intimidating process because as a non-native Russian speaker, picture a room like this filled with kind of mean-looking old Russian guys, and they're asking very pointed questions. Why did you do this? When at 8 minutes of the launch you had this failure, why did you respond this way? Most of it was focused on the Russian guys, but a couple of the questions were towards me. And we passed all that, which was a nice relief, and then had some ceremonial things in Red Square where we laid some flowers on some of the historic Russian space guys' areas, toured through the Kremlin, and had about a week or so off before we headed on an airplane down to Kazakhstan. And this is where the video kind of picks up, and where we get on the plane and fly down to Baikonur, Kazakhstan. About a 4-hour flight from Moscow. It's in the middle of nowhere. It used to not even be on the map because it's very secretive in nature, the Russian space program. But now you can buy a ticket to go to Baikonur, but the only thing is the only thing that exists is the space industry there. You really can't go anywhere without proper authorities and things. So here we are at the Cosmonaut Hotel right there. That's just the same place that every astronaut was launched in the Russian vehicle since Yuri Gagarin back when dinosaurs were flying in space.
So we stay in the same place. It's kind of cool. There's a lot of history there. On the first day, the first full day after getting there, we go into the assembly plant here and see our vehicle and do what's called a fit check. And we put on our suit and climb in the cockpit and make sure everything's where we want it. That part right there is called the orbital module, and you go in and then go down a hatch and you're into the descent module. The descent module is the only part that actually comes back to Earth with people, but there's a separation of modules that happens, and we'll talk about that later in the video. Here we are signing the doors. It's kind of neat. You can walk down this hallway in the hotel and see signatures of every one of these guys. Really kind of cool to be part of that. I cannot wait until we as a nation have our own space vehicle launching with American flag from Kennedy Space Center, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't trade my experience in the Russian, representing NASA in the United States and the Russian vehicle. I wouldn't trade it at all. I had a really fantastic time. So, this is amazing actually. A rail car pulls this thing out of that assembly plant, like dude smoking cigarette, come on, next thing, 45 minutes later, it's in the vertical position, just like that, ready to go. And later on that night, we launched at 2 in the morning, so we actually had a pretty significant sleep shift to do. You can imagine you don't want to be performing high pressure stuff when you're all screwed up with sleep, so we adjusted for about 10 days before that. So here we are walking out on launch night. There's all kind of activity and people cheering, and it's really, really motivating right there. And then you get onto this bus. Keep in mind, it's 2 in the morning, and launch pads are never right next to people and stuff because you don't want bad things to happen. So it's far away from this building, the 20, 30-minute ride. So we get on this bus, it's absolutely quiet. You just hear the hum of the fan. That gray thing is a cooling system so we don't get too hot inside the suit. And get to the pad, and there's just a handful of managers here, the people with the camera, and that's about it. It looks like a lot of people there, but it's really not. And any country, any vehicle that you see the pad on launch day, it's this impressive thing. The vehicle's like hissing and steam coming off of it and just creaking, and you can almost feel the energy that's trapped up in that thing waiting to blast you off. This is a tiny little elevator, just barely big enough for the 3 of us to get in. We're all kind of squished in there, we ride up, and one by one we crawl into the cockpit, and that happens about 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours before liftoff. So you're kind of sitting there, just waiting, and not really much going on until the clock ticks down, and then there you go, liftoff. Now, you might think that it's this huge, like slam in the back when the rocket lights, but it's really not. It's a sort of gradual thing. You can picture the thrust is just enough to get it up and going, and then as the fuel burns away, it's getting lighter and lighter. The same thrust is giving it more acceleration, or you're just accelerating faster and faster, and until the vehicle kind of limits itself around 3 Gs or so. The shuttle was the same way, and this particular rocket is a 3-stage rocket, which means that the first engine will light for a handful of minutes, and then when that fuel is used up, there's a series of explosive bolts that go, which is actually a pretty dynamic event. The whole vehicle shakes, and then that chunk falls away, and the second engine lights. It goes for a handful of minutes. Same thing, that section separates, and then the third stage gets you finally to orbit, and then that takes about 9 minutes, the whole thing. With the shuttle and previous to the Soyuz, we were grounded to the space station on the 3rd day, but the Russians are changing up their program a little bit, and just so happened our crew, not because of who we were, just by luck, we were the first guys to do a 6-hour rendezvous. So right after launch, 6 hours later, we were doing this here, approaching to the space station. Now, keep in mind we're going 17,500 miles an hour. It's 5 miles a second. This big hunk of metal is going 5 miles a second. Our little hunk of metal is going 5 miles a second. And a nice, controlled, smooth approach, bringing these two things together to connect them and doing it all lined up nice so the seals go. And it looks so benign, doesn't it? But think about what's happening in physical space right there. 5 miles a second, both those things
are going. It just kind of blows my mind every time I think about it. That portion is the orbital module that's connecting into the space station. And on the left-hand side, you see that window. That's the descent module, and my head is right there. To give you a sense, my head is right by that window. And that little part is the only part that actually returns to Earth, to give it, kind of put it in perspective of the size. So then you're on the space station. We can just open the hatch. There's a series of leak checks we got to do, and venting and changing pressure and moving air back and forth. Finally, when we're confident that the seals are good and you're not going to depressurize the space station, we'll open the hatch and come on in. We had Chris Hadfield, Tom Marshburn, and a Russian guy were there waiting for us. Hadfield has this big, thick black mustache, so I got my hands on a fake one and stuck it in my suit, and I greeted him with a fake mustache on. He got a kick out of it. So I had been into space before, so I kind of remembered how to float around, but it takes some practice, even when you're going back a second time. The tendency is to push too hard, and you really don't need to push hard at all, just kind of fingertip pushing. And you can see here is Chris and I floating around, just little bitty pushes. It's all about the momentum. Yeah, it's really fun. It's fun if you're a grown-up or a kid, it doesn't matter, it's just fun to float around. The space station is pretty big. It's about like a 4 or 5 bedroom house, plenty of room. I never ever felt squished or cramped with my crewmates. This is a node where we ate most of our meals and hung out. This is the Japanese portion of the space station. Anyways, this is the U.S. lab where we do most of our experiments, and experiments are a huge portion of our time. Probably 60% of our time is spent doing some type of experiment. This guy's called Robonaut. And he's kind of useless right now because he doesn't move. They're going to add a mobile base to him so he can get around and then he'll be more useful. But it's cool to play with his motions and things like this. There's these next things, these little soccer ball sized satellites right here. They're really cool. They zip around the station and use a cell phone camera to map and make imagery, take inventory of the space station, create the map and then navigate itself within what the map it created. And middle school students around the country can take part in those competitions every summer. They have those. So that was my favorite experiment to be part of. 2 different glove boxes. This one was being stubborn and doesn't want to push back in. But 2 glove boxes, one in the U.S. lab, that's in the Japanese section there. Most of the experiments are are dealt with in the glove box just to keep the combustions or gases kind of safe. And I think, there's flame in space, which is kind of cool. It doesn't look like a candle, it's a spherical ball. Maintenance is another big part of our job, and so maybe 30% of our time doing maintenance. This particular filter, you'd be grossed out about it, but that's the filter that turns yellow pea into nice clean drinking water. And the machine actually works. We do have a machine, and once you get mentally over that fact, it's not a big deal. The cupola is really one of the greatest places to hang out. It has this 360-degree window. It's right in the floor. So any given time you have some free time, just float over to the cupola and hang out. And that's what 5 miles a second looks like out the window, about that fast. Here we go into another sunrise. Give you an idea of what we see. There's Florida at night, oceans and deserts and cities and rivers. Really, really fascinating. And that's every astronaut. That's one of our favorite things to do is look out the window when we have free time. Here's where we do hygiene, brush teeth, clean them, give ourselves mohawks, all that kind of stuff happens right here. This is an area called Node 3. You can see, did you see the hair kind of float away and it got caught in the air conditioning? Anything you let go gets caught in the air conditioning and it zips away and you can lose it in a heartbeat. The only good thing is you find it in the air conditioning return like 2 or 3 days later, so you never really lose it. You find it later. So Chris and Tom Marshburn left, and then Karen Nyberg and Luca and another Russian came up
a couple weeks later. So there was a period of about a week and a half where Pavel, Sacha, and I we were the only ones. It was just 3 of us, and I was the only guy on the U.S. side of the space station, which was kind of neat for me. I felt like I was the only person up there because during the day, the Russians are on their end and we're on our side. This part of the video talks about spacewalks, which happens to be my favorite thing to do in space. There's different tools. That's our cordless drill. We have 2 sizes of sockets, which is pretty handy. Some 5/8 and 7/16, so you don't have to have a whole bunch of different sockets. The spacesuit kind of feels like a big heavy rain jacket when it's all loose and floppy and disassembled. It gets its rigidity and stiffness once you pressurize it, and we pressurize it to about 4.5 pounds of pressure over the ambient pressure around us. There's different tools. If a construction guy wears a tool belt, we wear a tool chest, because the only place you can access with the bulkiness of the arms and the gloves is really right here in front of your chest area. It's difficult even on your waist because you can't see, and sometimes, so all the tools exist right here, and it can get kind of cumbersome to manipulate and carry a lot of tools. So we carry these big bags to carry a lot of the other tools that we need. That thing right there is a safety tether. The first thing you do is don't let go. If you did let go, that safety tether would pull you back to wherever the hook is, and we usually leave the hook connected to the airlock hatch. So that's really our key primary safety measure while we're in space, doing spacewalks. While I was in the shuttle, I was lucky enough to do 3 spacewalks, and then again 3 more, this time on the space station. 2 of these most recent 3 spacewalks were pretty much as the plan went, nothing spectacular to talk about, but the 3rd one was pretty serious and interesting now, because Luca had a leak in his backpack where the water from his cooling system somehow, we know now, but somehow was getting into his breathing oxygen, and as oxygen was coming into his helmet, so was water. And water was filling up inside his helmet, and the surface tension really drives the behavior of the water, so once it glommed onto the back of his head, it just grew like a boundary of water around his melon and covered his eyes and his nose, and by the time we got back inside, it was right by his mouth, and he actually had a mustache, which, as funny as it sounds, kind of helped him because the hairs of the mustache whipped the water around and away from his mouth. And so he noticed it about an hour into the spacewalk, and it took us about 45 minutes from the decision to go back to actually get to this point here where we could get the helmet off. And in that 45 minutes is where it got pretty dicey. When we were in the airlock waiting for the repressurization so we could open the hatch, he couldn't see, couldn't hear because the water was in his ear cups. So we were just holding hands and squeezing back and forth. I could tell he was fine, but it was not a comfortable feeling. So we talked about spacewalks and maintenance and experiments. What the heck else do we do on the space station? Well, we have to move bags, really simple as it is, because it takes a lot of stuff to keep the experiments going, keep us fed, keep us clothed, and all that stuff gets there on these different cargo vehicles. This particular one is the Japanese cargo vehicle. There's a European cargo vehicle. The Russians provide a thing called the Progress vehicle. We in the United States have 2 companies that are currently making vehicles. This guy's called SpaceX. You may have heard of them. They provide a vehicle, and Orbital Sciences makes this one called the Dragon capsule. All of those take different amounts of stuff to the space station. Most of them just get really close, and then we reach out with a robotic arm and grab it and stick it to the hatch. Only the Russian and the European actually navigate themselves all the way to docking automated. We're ready to take over if we need to, but they do it automated usually. Here's Luca working with the bags. Imagine that a moving truck full of stuff shows up at your house, and your house is full of stuff, and you have to swap the 2 things, and you can't put stuff on the yard. That's kind of what it's like. And it makes a mess. There's lots of bags, there's stuff everywhere, and you gotta be really organized.
because there's things everywhere. The nice treat, I think I missed it in the video, but did you see the fresh fruit? Yeah, that's really a treat. Real pleasure to get lettuce and onions and tomatoes and vegetables and things like this on board the space station. Food is a big part of that. Here's Karen's strawberry shortcake concoction. But just like camping, food is a really essential part of not only giving you the energy you need for the basic necessity of food, but the social aspect of it, and just the whole, hey, can I make you something to eat part about being a crewmate, because food is a huge part, and it's surprising how big of a part food ended up being. Same with exercise, 2 hours every day devoted to exercise, not so much for keeping strong, but to keep our bones healthy. If we did nothing, we would come back as we'd leave as young 30, 40-year-old people and come back with the bones of like an 80-year-old person. So resistive exercise is the single most important thing for bone health that we've learned. The equipment is really good. We have that big machine that you saw. We have the running treadmill, which is actually on the wall. You probably saw it there. And then we also have a bicycle. And those are more, the bike and the treadmill are more for heart and cardiovascular health, but the most important part is the weightlifting. So then it's time to go home. There we are on undock day. We closed that hatch about 5 hours before touchdown. 4 of those hours is kind of boring. Put on the suit, leak checks, hang out. And then the last hour is just nutty. As we push off from the space station, back away to a safe enough distance to fire the rockets a little bit, and then get to a point once we're happy with the systems on the vehicle to fire the big engine to slow us down and start capturing the atmosphere as we descend down in there. That's what it looked at right out the window by my head. Several thousand-degree plasma right on the other side of that window. To a gross order, you can think of the amount of energy that goes into the vehicle on launch. What you see for launch all has to come back out when you're coming home, and the heat shield does the lion's share of the work to keep us safe. Once we come out of the atmosphere, another explosion as the heat shield separates, and a few seconds later the parachute opens. All those are just big, kind of shake you around dynamic events, and you kind of fall down for about 10 minutes, and then there's a little flash of light that they brief us as a deceleration engine, but I don't believe them, because you're coming down hard and fast. I think it really does slow you down, but you hit, there's no doubt about it when you hit. We had beautiful weather, landed in September, so the helicopters could get there right away, and so we got out of the vehicle maybe a half hour after landing, and they pull us out and set us in these chairs nearby, right next to the capsule, and the medical people are erecting this tent close to that period. They give us a phone, we call home, say, hey, I made it, and they're like, yeah, I know, I'm watching you. And then in that medical tent, we change out of the white spacesuit and put this outfit on, do a couple rudimentary experiments really to make sure, to see how you're doing balance-wise. And then I flew on a helicopter from that remote location to a nearby airport, which was about an hour and a half flight. And then at that airport, there was a NASA plane waiting, and I got on that and flew all the way back to Houston. We still had to clear customs, so we landed in Bangor, Maine, and cleared customs, and then flew back into Houston. So about 24 hours later, from touchdown in the middle of nowhere, had my head on my own pillow in Houston, which was kind of cool. So that's the video. My favorite part is to hear your questions, so maybe fire away. We've got a nice small group, so lots of people can ask. Yeah.
Have you ever wanted to go to Mars?
Have I ever wanted to go to Mars? I don't want to go to Mars right now. I think that we're not ready to go to Mars right now, and it's too big of a risk in terms of sending people now. But there's several things that we're getting at, because my personal opinion is Mars should be the goal of where we take our manned space program, and to get there, we got to make sure all this stuff is going to work right, and I believe we could use the moon to sort of help figure that part out. And then with the current rocket technology, if you burn the engine and coast, and then burn the engine to slow down and get into Mars atmosphere, that's like 6 months-ish to get there, depending on how the planets are going, and then sink and come back. So it's a long mission. There's rocket technology that they're working on right there in Houston of a constant low thrust engine that can cut that time down to the order of like a month-ish. And so I think that's what we need to do to kind of make it more realistic. When it's like that, I'll go in a heartbeat. But right now, I think it's a little bit too risky for me to go tomorrow.
You answered a lot of my questions just in your delivery there, and I really appreciate it. One of the things I heard you talk about was the measurements of your tools. So are you using English measurement, not metric? Or do you use both?
You'd think it would have been squared away in the design, right? But the Russian side is all in metric, and the U.S. side, which includes the European portion and the Japanese portion, is all in English units. The bolts are, they call the tool, the procedure will call out a U.S. English system tool size. That was a lot of words, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So how do you get it all fit together there with those two different kinds of measurements?
Well, yeah, it works. That's the amazing part about it, right? I mean, if you tell kids in Central High School to build a hot dog stand, and you have, in this part of the building, they're building the hot dog thing, and over there they're building the chassis that's going to wheel the hot dog stand, and somebody else is building another portion of it, and then they have to bring it all together in the auditorium and put it together, and they're working independently on their things, and it's got to plug in and work. I bet 5 out of 10 times it wouldn't go together, and which is what amazes me about the space station. That's most of the pieces had an opportunity to meet each other on Earth before they went, but there's a handful of instances where interfaces never touched each other until it got to space, which says a lot for the international community and engineering and the teams that were working on that to sort through those issues like the metric system and the English units and things like that.
So given that, is there any kind of tolerance built into it or any kind of flex in the parts where they marry up?
Yeah, so short answer is yes. There's on those actual mechanisms that go together, a handful of the bolts have like a wiggly portion to it, so it can accept a little bit of slop, and then it lines it up through these guide pins and comes in. But they have some kind of features that can accommodate for that. Sir?
What do you see NASA's future in regards to manned space flight now that the shuttles are retired? Is there anything on the horizon to replace it?
So, yes, there is things on the horizon to replace it. So where we're going is, let me take a step back. Going to space is an expensive endeavor that kind of you need a long-term plan, 10-year kind of plan. Unfortunately, in the nature of our government, 10 years is an eternity in terms of presidential cycles and budget cycles and all these things. So it's very challenging to have a long vision that doesn't get disrupted when changes happen or the economy plunges and budgets have to be slashed and all these things. So that's a key challenge for us. And we've kind of suffered through a little bit of that in the last probably 6 or 7 years, trying to hone in on what's NASA's long-term vision. And I touched on a little bit to the question here, what do I think it should be? I think that we should set our sights on Mars. Personally, I think that when the American public, I mean, you guys, by the nature of being here at 7 o'clock at night on a Monday night, are curious people about space, and maybe you know a little bit more than your average folks, but some people don't realize that the space shuttle is retired, don't realize that we can't get to the moon anymore. I mean, you'd be amazed how many people in America don't know that we can't go to the moon right now. And what I think is when the American public sees a Chinese dude planting a flag and standing on the moon, they're going to say, hey, where's our guy? How come our guy's not right next to him? And that alone will reinvigorate our political system and give us the political will, which will then give the funding to drive us to this sort of competition again, and competitive nature, to maybe either go back to the moon or go to Mars or whatever is decided as the right vision. Again, my personal opinion is Mars is that answer.
So you're saying that you foresee a second space race, but instead of with the Russians, it'll be with the Chinese?
I kind of think that is just my personal opinion, because the Chinese right now have this very deliberate, step-by-step, whole bunch of momentum going at it, and they're not slowing down. And they've got a space station, and they have an unmanned thing to the moon, and they have a plan. I personally don't know exactly what the plan is. Maybe somehow we as a government know what their plan is, but probably they're keeping it very closed off, because NASA has reached out to try to go to China and share some ideas and things, and they don't really want that cooperation. So that's where I see kind of this race, in which my personal opinion is good. As a space guy, I say bring it on, and that'll get us going. Sure.
What do you think about the space tourism, like the Virgin Record guy trying to create this space tourism?
So I kind of think it ties into this question here. The Virgin guys, specifically them, they do go suborbital, which means they launch from a place, I think New Mexico is where they're planning on, and go up and get about 15, 20 minutes of zero gravity, and then land right back where they took off. And a whole different big step to go orbital and go to orbit the Earth and dock to the space station if you want to. And that's what SpaceX is doing, unmanned. And SpaceX is also, and I forgot one part of your question, sir. SpaceX is converting their unmanned vehicle to a manned vehicle, and then Boeing and Lockheed are building an Orion capsule, which will look a lot like a Apollo capsule, and that will also have the ability to go to the space station, and also have the heat shield capacity to have high speed reentry, the same reentry speeds that you get coming back from the moon or potentially from Mars. So that would be the vehicle that we, as a United States, would launch from Florida. So, kind of these two questions combined is that I think that what would be a good plan for us as a nation is have these private companies take over the logistics of going to and from the space station with people and cargo, and have the more expensive, longer-term thing that an individual company can't afford to do, but a government can, and take the U.S. government vehicle to Mars or wherever we end up going. It kind of ties in together.
Is there a way for the ship to protect against like space dust and space objects that may fly into the ship?
So space debris is the #1 risk to any space mission. I mean, the launch is a dynamic event, coming back is a dynamic event. But if you look at the broad spectrum of risk, space debris is the #1 thing. Excuse me. On my various spacewalks outside the space station going along, you can see little hits in the metal where it's been hit by very small particles. What is small, I mean like the size of a pencil, lead, and it's just kind of a little gouge. Like if you could take your finger and rub it over the metal, you'd feel the burr in the metal. And it's all over the place. And the shuttles, when they would come back to Earth, very often the window panes would have little cracks in them from being hit. So on the space station, there's certain parts of it that have extra material, and so there's a pressure barrier, and then on top of that, there's additional material that protects from things like this. But it's just a matter of time probably before some particle has enough energy and strikes at the right angle to do some serious damage. Whether it pokes through, I don't know, maybe it damages the solar arrays or something like this, but it's definitely a risk.
What do you think of Albert Einstein's theory that you shattered Newton's theory of space-time?
Oh, wow, good questions. Well, who am I to second guess Albert? But I think what you're getting at is when you're going really fast, you either get older or younger, this type of thing. Is that what you're getting at? Theory of relative velocities and stuff?
I guess so.
You guess so? Well, it's, mathematically, I'm probably a little younger than when I left, but I think it's like in the 0.000 kind of range. So it didn't feel any, like, there's no net effect, at least, as I walk out here and pass honk out from old age, right? Yes,
Can
ma'am.
you tell us a little bit about food, how you eat, what it's like, what you eat?
Certainly. So you saw in the video the making of scrambled eggs. So most of the food is dehydrated, like that, where you just stick it in this needle, push a button, and water squirts into it. You let it sit. Maybe like a mountain house camping meal. If you had those things before, it's dehydrated. You add a little water, kind of like that. Really good. My favorite was seafood gumbo, but there's meats and vegetables and side dishes and potatoes. Mashed potatoes. Rice is a very challenging thing to eat because it doesn't stay on the spoon. So you got to add more water than it calls for because it doesn't stick. And crackers are a mess and they go everywhere. What was another hard one to eat? Apple chips. The worst experience of my space career was trying to eat a bag of apple chips that somebody had sent up there. You know those things are kind of like potato chips? And they crumbled, and there was this dust, and there was this explosion of apple chips around me. That was bad. And then some of the food is in a pouch, like a military meal ready to eat, where you can just tear it open and eat it. We have a heater. You can heat it up if you want to, or just open it. And another big portion of the food is things that you can just get at the grocery store. Tuna fish, hot packets. Not necessarily the cans, but the packet kind of stuff. Chocolate, candy bars, power bars, Cliff bars. Those kinds of things are very popular because during the day, when you're busy doing experiments and zipping all around, it's easy. It's nice to be able to grab like some sort of quick bar that doesn't make crumbs and stuff and eat it quickly. But the food is good. There's lots of it. I actually gained about 10 pounds while I was there. Partly because I was lifting weights every day, but partly also because it's like walking into what was this grocery store right there?
Market of choice.
Market of choice. I walked in there today. I was like, oh my God, this place is heaven. And that's what the wall of food on the space station is like. It's just all this food. You can eat it easily, quickly.
What kind of experiments are you doing?
So there's different kinds. There's the ones that get to the space station and just do their thing, and we never even have to touch them. There's other kinds where we, as a crew member, unpack it, plug it in, undo a few things, and walk away, and it does its thing by itself. There's other ones where we pull it out, set it up, and actually have to do stuff to it over like a 5 or 6 hour day, and the scientist is watching on the video, and we're talking to that scientist. It's very interactive. And then the other kind of category is where we are the subjects, and that's usually food and changing diet and or ultrasound of our bodies in different parts like bone health and spine and things like this. Specifically on what they are, one of the ones that I thought was really cool was a fluids experiment where it turns out you can change the shape of a container and drive the fluid where you want it to go based on the shape. And kind of like the pointy part of a heart, like a Valentine's Day heart, that pointy part is the exact angle is what they're working on. But that part right there is where the fluid it tends to go. And so we're in pretty soon, probably the next vehicle, will have engines that get its fuel supplied to the engine without a pump, just by the shape of the container, which is pretty fascinating because it allows you to use every drop of fuel. And so that was what we were working on, how to change the thing. The fire one, we were testing different combustion properties of materials. It turns out it's not exactly the same as what you might think the best material that you test here on Earth is for keeping the equipment safe in space. And then I touched on the ultrasound. We do a lot of ultrasound, both of our spine and our eyes, because eye change is a very common problem for astronauts. It has to do with the pressure of the eyeball. I don't quite understand it exactly, but so we're using ultrasound to try to map the shape of the eyeball to see how, if you're susceptible to permanent eye shifting. I was lucky I didn't have any long-term effect on my eyesight. So that's a couple of examples.
First of all, thank you very much for your service, both in the military and with NASA.
Thank you.
I apologize, we have to leave for baseball meeting, but do you have, does he have access to you, to if you want to send you a question, like future advice? Do you have a public email address that you have for communication?
So I can, through my uncle, I can get you that answer, and then maybe we can, did you go to high school here?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can get you that information, and I'll be happy to help out.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Your last trip out to the space station, how long did it last?
6 months.
6 months.
I want to piggyback on his question. Can you tell us a little bit about your high school experience with your math and science education, and how much that kind of helped you as a math teacher?
Yeah. So,
And as a science teacher.
So, for me, math is a subject that I was just good at. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed trying to solve problems, and I liked it. It came naturally. Whereas writing English papers was not such a pleasurable experience for me. So, me personally, really enjoyed my math classes and physics too, although it's interesting, I'm much more interested in physics now as a grown-up than I was back in high school. I remember just thinking about, the ball throwing and balls dropping and doing those problems and not really kind of applying it to my real everyday life, whereas that's what I do for work now, is understand how things interact. And really, when you're doing a spacewalk and you're installing a box and the bolt doesn't go right, and it's all about understanding the forces and the torques and, okay, where should I apply this force to best help this box get in? When you apply it in the wrong direction, you could screw up the bolt, which then the thing doesn't plug in, or you could bend the electrical connectors that are kind of. So all those very practical aspects of my life as an astronaut, I sense now as a physics problem, whereas in high school, it was not the case for me. So it's been a maturation process, I guess, if you say, of understanding how the academic side of education fits into real life application. I guess a challenge of a teacher is to try to seek out those examples and that help solidify it in kids' brain. I don't know if I fully answered your question. Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about fluid dynamics and physiological change, which brought me to thinking about blood pressure. Has anyone done a study about blood pressure in space?
Yeah, and so what happens is it's the big change when you first get there. Your body thinks you have too much fluid, and you pee a lot in the first 2 days until you get neutral in terms of your body fluid and blood pressure and things. And then you're all fine, and until it's time to come home, and if you did nothing, you'd be really, really dehydrated when you landed. So we drink a whole bunch of water and take salt tablets on entry day to stay rehydrated. And then we're constantly wearing, every month I think we have a big on-orbit check in terms of blood pressure is certainly one of those things. And so they don't miss a beat to be ironic.
How easy or hard is it to sleep?
The sleeping is generally pretty easy. It's if you're a pillow person, it's kind of weird. I like pillows, you know, to hold the pillow, and so it's kind of when you first get used to it, it's kind of awkward on your head, and then your arms are floating around, and so you keep your arms in the sleeping bag generally. And then the other weird thing is when you close your eyes, you see these little particles flying through. It looks like lightning or shooting stars, and it's particles, you know, coming through your brain, coming through your eyeball, and you can see them. And it's very alarming when it first happens. It's weird.
Mary Roach wrote this book, it's called Packing for Mars, and she makes this big deal out of the idea that if you were to be sick and have space sickness in a space suit, that would be a really serious thing. Is there some sort of plan that if somebody was to lose their lunch in a space suit, what do you do?
It would be bad if you just didn't do anything and barked into the helmet, like straight off and bounce off and then it'd be a mess. But it'd be very easy if you felt it coming. We talked about this, you know, you just hold your head down a little and bend it underneath the rim of the helmet part and send it down into your belly, and it'd just stick to the guts of the suit, and it wouldn't be a mess forever. Have to deal with it afterwards, but you would die.
Was there any illness while you were in this?
While we were there, no. My Russian crewmate Sasha had a chunk of his tooth fall off. He had a bad filling, and this was early, like day 10 or 6 months. So every week we were packing his tooth with dental cement, but we had no anything else to speak of while we went in the back.
Have you seen the movie Cassidy?
I just saw it last week, actually.
What do you think about it?
I thought that it was entertaining. I thought that the cinematography was fantastic in terms of how it looked, down to really detailed. You know, like the switches on the suit were all exact. The helmet was really accurate. On the walls inside the space station when she's floating around, there's an oxygen sensing device that's stuck to the wall, and that's exactly where we put the oxygen sensing device. So clearly they had video models of it and combined it and made it a computerized version of the real spaceship. But the whole thing could not happen in real. You can't just go, oh, there's the Chinese space station, and zip off and go. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah.
How does one get chosen? What's the selection process to go on?
To go on a mission, once you're already an astronaut and you're there.
Yeah.
So that's a good question because sometimes we don't quite understand how it happens. There's a chief astronaut, and it's his or her job to assign the crews, but it's not in real life, it's not entirely up to that person because it's a little political with the international nature of it, and there's sort of this forced trading back and forth of different countries on okay, well, we have an allocation I was on the crew of 35 and 36, so the Japanese have a guy up there right now, and they want Koichi, and they want Koichi to be the commander of the space station, so they traded future time, kind of like sports, you know, they traded future time with another country so that Koichi could be the commander. There's all this going on that kind of makes it a little more complicated than just, okay, Chris, you're going to go on this mission in 2 years. So I don't really know exactly the process. It's just about I just got back in September. I would think the earliest I could go back to space is 4 or 5 years from now. And so I don't have any illusions of next year being assigned to a mission or anything. It's just, it's a slow sort of process.
How many people are on there right now?
On the space station, there's 6 all the time, except for brief periods when 3 people leave and they're waiting for the new 3 people to show up. Yeah.
What kind of time span is that? Within 12 hours or?
No, you mean when it's only 3 people? It's 2 weeks. Yeah, it's a chunk of time.
In your opinion, what is the most beautiful thing you've seen off this planet?
The most beautiful thing I've seen on the planet?
Off this planet.
Off this planet? Well, seeing off this planet, it is our planet.
Yeah.
And
Anything in particular?
yes, yeah. I really enjoy, different people have different things, whatever your personal tastes are. For me, it was seeing the coastlines and where rivers come out into the oceans. It was fascinating for me to see just how far the impact of a river goes out into bodies of water, and then how you could see where like a river snakes around. Take the Mississippi River, it snakes around lazily, and then over time portions of it get chopped off and the river changes, and you see that clearly from space. You know, you can see where the old river was and where the new. It was really cool to see all of that.
Cool.
So given that, can you tell where areas of the Earth where humanity dumps everything into the rivers and how it impacts the ocean in those areas versus where it's more controlled?
You can't really tell if it's a natural process, like the Mississippi River is very muddy and it looks like there's stuff everywhere, but it's just a muddy thing. So unless you have some context and knowledge about, okay, this is kind of a polluted area, you wouldn't know. Yes, ma'am.
Can you kind of see where it's snowing? Those are like big places.
So you can't see that active snowing, but you'd see the clouds. It would be very cloudy there that, you come over. I was up there for mostly the summer, so there wasn't much snow that I saw, but you can definitely, the areas that are socked in the clouds, you certainly can tell that. And then the snow-capped mountains jump out very clearly, like all in the area where Mount Everest is. You can't pick out Mount Everest. It just looks like a whole big range of tall mountains. It's very difficult to actually find Mount Everest. I don't know how we're doing on time. Maybe a couple more questions so people can get on with their evening. Yeah.
How do you know when it's standby ownership?
Good question. So the first question is, what time do you put on your watch? How do you know when to wake up? And because there's control centers in Houston and Moscow and Japan, we choose to live by Greenwich Mean Time, which is time in London, England. And so that's when we wake up and go to bed and base our whole crew day on is that time. And the control centers adjust to GMT. And we wake up at 6 generally, start work at about 7:30, end work at around 7:30 at night, 8 o'clock at night. And in the day there we have time off for lunch, an hour for lunch, and a 2-hour break for exercise. And then generally go to bed, up to the person, but 10:30 or so, and start that whole process. Monday through Friday was a work day. Saturday was a half day where we cleaned the space station until midday and exercise. So by the time we clean and exercise, it was generally about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. So it didn't feel like a half day. But Sunday was completely a free, unscheduled day where we just kind of hang out, read books, look out the window, call home, this type of thing. One more question, yes, sir.
Do the international geopolitical dynamics affect the relationships on the space station?
Pretty much no. On the space station, the answer is no. It's just a crew working together for a common thing. Now on a Friday night, when you've had a week of work and we're just hanging out and talking, we'll get into a little bit of that, particularly with the Russians, and ask a little bit. But in general, it's hard because even though they speak English, I kind of speak Russian, you get to a point where it's that type of conversation is a little too hard in second languages. Some Americans can do it in Russian, some Russian cosmonauts can do it in English. I was just sort of middle of the road Russian guy, Russian speaker, so it was challenging. But at face value, we're just a common crew up there to execute the plan and keep the space station safe. Where I think that has a little more impact is on the ground management teams negotiating contracts and deciding who's going to be the commander and all these crazy things. That's where the tensions might show themselves.
Chris, following up on that question, could you just talk a little bit about the conversation up aboard the ISS when you went up in 2009 between the Russian Air Force commander of the space station and the space shuttle commander?
Right. So thanks for reminding me about that. That was interesting because over the course of a couple days and a couple common meals, these two guys, the Russian cosmonaut who was on the space station and our shuttle commander, they realized that they were both assigned to bases at the same time near Afghanistan a while ago, kind of preparing to deal with each other in an adversarial role as Air Force pilots on each other's side, opposite sides, I mean, and literally like miles apart and a border apart from each other. That was their existence years before, and now here they are hanging out and listening to common music and sharing each other's tuna fish casserole and stuff. So it was kind of a surreal experience. Anyways, well, thank you very much for coming. You had great questions, and I really enjoyed being here tonight. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.